who understands the power of words more than Maya Angelou. I've been in her home at a party, someone telling a homophobic joke or making fun of someone in a derogatory way, and watched her invite them to leave or stop them in mid-sentence and say, "Not in my house, you won't."
Words are things, I'm convinced. You must be careful about the words you use, or the words you allow to be used in your house. In the Old Testament, we are told in Genesis that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. That's in Genesis. Words are things. You must be careful. Careful about calling people out of their names, using racial pejoratives and sexual pejoratives and all that ignorance. Don't do that. Someday we'll be able to measure the power of words. I think they are things. I think they get on the walls. They get in your wallpaper. They get in your rugs, in your upholstery, in your clothes, and finally into you.
I don't know anyone.
Everybody, my name is Luis Giraldo. I'm the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Cultural Competency here on campus. And I want to welcome you to this event. And as the great Maya Angelou was saying, the power of our words, right? The power of the things that we say to one another, right? And how that impacts people, the power of our stories. And for the oral cultures in the world, that's how we survived. We told our story. Our story was sacred. Our story came and went and transpired through time. And the young ones would listen to the elders speak. And they would learn the wisdom, and they would learn the teachings, and they would manifest those in the world. So that's why we're capturing these stories that often go untold. And people's voices are silenced, right? Because they have to be hidden. And that's hard, and it's impactful for our community. So at SPCC, like Dr. Bibi has stated, we stand against that, and we honor our voices, and we honor our stories. And the stories, like I said, are sacred. So today, in this gathering that we have, we're going to go about it in that way, honoring the sacredness of our stories. We have the honor to have students that are courageous leaders on our campus to speak their truth, to speak of the stories that often go unheard, the things that they have to live in their daily lives. And for that, I say thank you. I say thank you to this gathering. Thank you to this school, and thank you to you all for coming out and bearing witness to what will take place today. So let's give them a big round of applause.
Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to call myself Arturo. And just by listening to the video that we just saw, I was thinking, I used to think that words, it was just like something that doesn't have any meaning, or it was just like something that doesn't exist, or just like don't affect anybody because it was just words. But for me, words really mattered, and then I found out the way how it impacts me when I was called illegal. Illegal it's been something like that really puts me down everywhere I go. Like it's like a label that I have in my back that tells that I don't deserve anything in life, that I don't deserve to become better. And one of the examples I can give you is that when I go to work, I don't feel I can feel the looks of people that tells me that I don't belong there. I can feel I can even think or know what they thinking just by the way they by their body language, and then so it's just like it makes me feel like my life doesn't matter to them, and or my life don't matter. And then it's just like all my hard work that I do. It's just like it doesn't count just because my background or the way or the situation I am right now. And then I think that shouldn't be the case, because at the end of the day, we all are humans. We all looking for a purpose in life, and then and that should be like something like that make me find a common ground in this country. And then so that's kind of like the way I live all my, that's kind of my reality. I don't have that chance to feel freedom, or to feel like I can go places without worrying that someone is waiting for me outside on my house. And then all my future can just vanish. All the hard work that I've been doing to have a better life can go away. Since this new I would say area, I feel more like with fear. Like right now we have discussions in my house with my brother. We have to tell my nephew, hey, when someone's knock the door, don't open the door, or just think there is nobody. And he just responds, I'm just not open the door. He doesn't understand why we telling him that. When I go outside of my house, I have to look around, and if everything looks normal, like I've been living in this place for like 6-7 years, so I know my neighborhood. And then from now on, so every time I go in my house, or I come back from school, I have to like look around if nobody is waiting or something suspicious. So I mean, I think if we live in a place that we always say, every time we say that there is freedom and liberties, then why I have to live like that? Like why someone can have an argument about other countries, about how other countries they have this like inequalities among other countries, and right here I don't feel that sense of freedom. I mean, so that's kind of like doesn't make any sense to me. And so it's just like I have to worry about, like, even in school, like I always fear that I'm not gonna be able to log in my PayPal account, because probably I'm fear that something can happen, and just I'm not allowed to come to school anymore. And then for me, come to school is my only chance to be a better person. It's the only chance that I feel like I have a meaning in life. And then so I'm not here to take jobs of anybody. I'm not here to create problems. I'm here to create jobs. I am here to help others. And then I'm not here to change any values. I'm here to share my own values, so we can enrich our values and learn from each of us. So like that's the kind of the ideology that I try to build. Even if I believe these senses of fear and discrimination. So that's kind of my thinking of every day. I don't have the chance to feel sense of comfort. I don't know about comfort zone, because I don't know what that means. My future is uncertain, because just by waking up the next day, I can have like a totally different future. So like I have to think about whether I should continue come to school because I know there is no future for me, or I should go back to do the same thing I used to do, is working in 2 jobs and then try to build a house and then try to survive, not looking for something better. So, or I have to think about whether I want to continue this journey, because we know this is really hard. All the years that we have to spend in school. That's the other day I was coming back to my house, and then I heard my neighbor. My neighbor, she was screaming, and then I tried to go and see what's going on, and then later on I found that her mom died, and then she's undocumented. She could not go over there and see her, try to the last moments. And then that's what it keeps me. That's always that keep on mind. That I would say, should I be here and then continue getting an education? And then all of a sudden I hear that mom is not with me anymore, or after all these years when I come back, she's older, and then I'm not gonna be able to recognize her, or I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. The only thing that keeps me going is that I know the value of the education, and I know that because I see the change on myself, and I see that things can get better. And that's the kind of person I am. That's not a person that people talking about that I'm here to create crimes. I'm not a person that says that I'm here because I'm a rapist. I'm not a person who says that I'm here to just to do bad things. Is that clear that I don't want to listen to the facts, to those my experiences? It's just like how they gonna make a rational laws if the only thing they focus is on hateful ideas about the person who I am. So the one thing I finally want to say is, if you hear someone call someone illegal, just tell them the persons don't deserve to call being illegal. I encourage you to say something, because perhaps I have all the disadvantage and I cannot defend myself. But this is something I want to change, is the idea of calling persons illegals. I think we all have the same opportunities, the same dreams, regardless of color, skin, background. We all have the same willingness to become better and take advantage of this life. Because one of the things I always say also is, when I'm gonna die, I'm not gonna say, in my last moments, I'm not gonna say, God, sorry because I didn't do this. I apologize because I did all this wrong. I want to say to him, thanks for giving me this life. Thanks for giving me this opportunity of feeling that I exist. So that's all I have to say, and then I'll let all my other students to tell their story. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Today my name is Elizabeth. My story starts in a small city in Mexico called León, Guanajuato, where I was born in a low-income home. At the age of 25, my father came to the United States in search of something more, while leaving his family and 2 young daughters behind, with only a couple $100 in his pocket and a small suitcase. Here in Santa Barbara, it was very difficult to find a job with only a 6th grade education. With only a 6th grade education and Spanish as his primary language. My dad never gave up because he truly believed that if he sacrificed enough and left behind the place that he called home, it would provide a better future for my sister and I. I was 1 when I migrated to the United States. with my aunt and my older sister using my cousin's documentations. At the age of 9 or 10, it was the first time that I found out that I was undocumented for the first time. After I asked my dad, why did I have to speak to my grandma through the phone every Saturday, and why could I not just go to her house and see her? I don't see my parents as criminals. I see them as heroes because they left their own family behind just so that one day I could have my own and have opportunities that they never had the chance to, like going to school and having a job. Since I've benefited from DACA, I have been able to provide for my family and give back a little bit of what they've done for me. This is the only place that I know, and through it all, I feel like I've sacrificed a lot along with them, including my culture and my language. If you ask me to write a paper in English, I will finish it in 15 minutes. If you ask me to write a paper in Spanish, I will look at you and tell you I can't. This is my home, and I will continue to share my story in order to empower others who still haven't found their own voice. And I want to leave you with this. Trump was absolutely right about one thing. It is time to make America great again, but the only way that we can accomplish this is if we start to change the lens that we're viewing immigration through and start to embrace the immigrants in this country and the immigrants that will continue to come to this country. And lastly, embrace all diversity and cultures that they bring along with them. Thank you.
I wanted to thank all of you for being here today and for everyone who put this event together. I also want to thank my two other fellow students who have shared their stories. I am sure that you must be a little confused that when you heard someone speaking through the mic, you didn't see us. And that's part of the reason is that we didn't want to reveal our identities, so we provided fake names. My name, you may call me Anna for today. I decided not to show my face today not because I am afraid. I am afraid sometimes of what might happen to me, but I know that I am putting myself at risk. And I know that, there might be people who might come after me and that might want to hurt me. And I understand, what the risks, what that may mean for me. But I chose not to show myself publicly because even though I am willing to put myself at risk, I cannot say the same for my family. I cannot put them at risk, because they didn't sign up for, the harassment or for deportations or anything like that. So we all chose not to show ourselves because out of respect, for our families, or maybe because we are not sure if our safety could be guaranteed. So I first, just wanted to let you all know that's part of the reason why you cannot see you cannot see us, you can only hear us. But we did want to share our story, and we did want to, let you know a little bit more about us. I came to this country in 2003 with my mom and my two siblings. We came to join my dad, who had already been here a couple years before us. He came to work and support his family back in Mexico. But we decided to all come to the U.S. because we wanted our family to be together. And he, and my mom, they both, helped us go to college. I grew up here in the Santa Barbara community, and I ended up going on to UCLA. And right now I am pursuing my master's degree. That is, the next step for me. So I am taking some classes here in SBCC to prepare for my master's degree. One thing that I wanted to say is, that, many of us, like today, will come out and speak. But I also wanted to say that, my other brothers and sisters from the Philippines, or my brothers and sisters from Peru, or, my very good friend from Sweden is also, they are also undocumented, and sometimes they don't have the courage to share their stories. There are undocumented, individuals from, every country out there. So, one important thing to know is, it's not just Latinos who are undocumented. Another thing, that I wanted to share is, why we're all here. We all came here because, the DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the program that was put into place by Obama is, under threat. And, I am grateful for all of you who are here today, and I am grateful for all the people in Santa Barbara and in this state who are, doing their best to fight for this program. I am grateful for all of that, support. But I also want to say that, there are many more of us, all the immigrant, undocumented people here in this country who are also at risk. They live in fear. We may be, a little bit protected because we are given a work permit and we are placed on the low priority, deportation priority. But, there are other people who are not on that list. They are high priority. And so, they live in constant fear, like my parents, who are constantly afraid, that they may lose their jobs, that they may be deported, and that they, I have a younger brother, and that if they leave, that my brother that there won't be anyone to look after him. So, while we're here to, talk about DACA and to learn what we can do to make sure that the program continues, I think that we also have to talk about the bigger picture about passing a bill that addresses the immigration system for, allows for legalization of all undocumented people in this country. And as Arturo was saying, it's not, we're not criminals, we're not here to, bring harm to this country because this is our home. But we're here to, build our communities to contribute to this country. And if we are to fix the immigration system, we have to fix the prison system, the criminal system. And if we have to address both in order to, fully address the immigration system. And it's not easy, and it's something that will take a long time. But if we are really committed to our communities, I feel like we will slowly, work towards that. Again, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming here and taking the time today to come in. I will go ahead and pass the mic back to the speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Saturn Chabong, and I am the president of the Black Student Union here at the City College. I am an intern at the Scheinfeld Center. If you guys don't know, it's just right out there. And I am a student here at Santa Barbara City College. I'm here today to tell you about my story growing up undocumented. Surprisingly, many people don't know that I grew up undocumented, and they don't even know that I'm an immigrant. Growing up without papers was an interesting experience. My family and I spent many days back and forth in different immigration buildings, and There were many days that I missed school because of it, and I didn't really realize that other kids didn't have to go through that. It was so normal to me growing up that I would miss school for these really random check-ins and just this process that I didn't realize that it just wasn't the norm. I guess telling my background, I'm sure you guys are all wondering where I'm from. I was born in Turin, Italy, to two Cameroonian parents. Cameroon is in Central Africa. And my dad, like many of their parents, came to America before us. I think my dad came in 1999 to just visit the area, and he went into a McDonald's and saw teenagers around 17 working in McDonald's, and he was really inspired by that for some reason. Just this American dream that, just the notion that you can do anything and go for anything in America, and that's very much preached. So one of the push and pull factors that my dad, or that my family had, was the land of opportunity as it's preached so much in the US, and the push factor from Italy to the States is that at that time there wasn't necessarily racism, but there was a lot of ignorance, and us being pretty much the only Black family in our entire neighborhood, it wasn't a life that my father envisioned. He was a pretty successful actor in Italy, and I used to ask him all the time, why would you leave that? Like, why would you come here? And again, as I told you guys, he came here and saw McDonald's, and that's pretty much how he was so inspired. But he would always tell us that when he came back from Italy, there's this thing in Italy where you can go into, now they have McDonald's there, so yeah, you can go into a McDonald's in Italy, or a movie theaters or different things like that, and the people that you see working in there are a lot older, usually in their 30s. So just the fact that he could come to the States and see kids essentially working at such a young age was such an inspiration for him. And he was like, I want to see my kids in here one day. Ironically, I have never worked in a McDonald's in my entire life. I've actually never worked in the fast food service at all, so it didn't work out too well for my dad and his vision. However, we came to the States in 2000. Me, my mom, my dad, and my two older siblings, my brother and my older sister. Coming to the States and not knowing English or why we left Italy, it was pretty confusing as a kid. I learned English through watching That's So Raven and Even Stevens. I was in ESL growing up in the English as a second language, and in the household, my dad pretty much enforced only speaking Italian and French in the house and no English whatsoever. So English was definitely something that I learned outside of the household, and it wasn't allowed inside the house because he wanted us to preserve our culture and be very proud of it. It was very interesting growing up with this secret, in a sense. A lot of the times when people hear undocumented, they automatically associate it with the Latinx community, as my fellow panelists mentioned. However, immigration and being undocumented crosses racial boundaries. It's not a them issue, it's an us issue. Any of us, actually all of us, are immigrants unless you are Native Americans. So we are all immigrants to this country. Some of us just came at later times and us wanted. So back to my point, just growing up was an experience that I could not relate to other people because the community that I grew up in, which is Prince George's County, Maryland, like 10 minutes outside of Washington, D.C., there weren't many people like me, I guess. There weren't many undocumented Black folks, or the Latinos that were there were from El Salvador, so a lot of them had their papers as well. So it was a really big secret that I held in my heart, and not being too familiar with what it actually meant to be undocumented. I just knew that I was an immigrant and that I spoke languages that my fellow classmates didn't speak, and it was so normalized to me. But I remember growing up not wanting to feel so different and being so tired of being able to speak other languages, which is really crazy because now I really embrace that. But I just remember being in middle school and being on the phone with my father, and because he enforced us speaking our native language so much, that's what how we communicated. And I remember being on the phone with him, and I just started speaking English to him, and he was really confused. And I just remember, because I was in public, I just did not want to feel so different. And I knew that I would be discriminated against because I was different, and my name is Saturn, so you can imagine how it is growing up with the name after a planet, and my last name being Chabong, which is also not like Johnson. No offense to any Johnsons out there. It's just much different. So I was already different, and I spoke different languages, and I hated it. It wasn't easy, and it didn't make it any easier that there was no one that I can speak to about this, and it was kind of something that was untalked about in my household, not necessarily because of shame, but there was just that elephant in the room that no one really wanted to discuss, and not really knowing why I couldn't go back to Italy to visit my family members. And it was just a very weird time, and like I was saying earlier, always having to go to these immigration buildings in Baltimore and having to fill out all these documents as a little kid. The turning point of my immigrant experience was when I was in the 7th grade, and my older sister was, I believe she was a sophomore or a junior in high school, and my brother was in the 8th grade, and my little sister was in elementary school. And we came home to my older sister telling me that my dad had been taken by ICE. Prior to that moment, I never felt as if I was undocumented. I knew I was an immigrant, and I knew I was foreign and different, but I never felt undocumented, and I never felt as if my safety or my security was in jeopardy. But the day that my dad was taken by ICE, that's when I knew that things were very different for my family, and that things would never be the same from that point on. I remember this day like it was yesterday, and it's very emotional to talk about, because this is actually the first time I've ever talked about it to a crowd this big. But I came home, and my older sister was waiting at the door for us, prepared to let us know that our father had been taken. And just in that moment, in the 7th grade, 11 or 12 years old, I was shocked, and I was really confused as to why they targeted us. We were law-abiding citizens. We paid taxes. We went to school. We were just overall really good people, much like most immigrants are. So I didn't know why they came and targeted us, and specifically my father. For the rest of that day, it was very scary and confusing. My mom came home extremely nervous and not really knowing what to do. She began to pack. She packed, and she left us home with an aunt that was visiting from Italy, my uncle's wife. And she went to go stay at a friend of the family's house. And I just remember her spraying her perfume on her bed, and just out of fear that ICE would come back and possibly take her. And she knew that they wouldn't take us, but she had a fear that they would take her. And she didn't want that to happen, and she knew that we were protected, but she wasn't. And already with one parent in custody, it was going to be very difficult for us to function. And just for the remainder of that night, I remember staying up really, really late. And if anyone in this crowd knows me, I like go to sleep at 9 o'clock like every night. So it was, as a kid, staying up extremely late, probably at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then still having to go to school the very next day and act like everything is normal, and not being able to tell anyone what was happening was something that I honestly don't wish on anyone, especially not a 7th grader. It was really intense. And eventually my mom was able to contact a lawyer that so happened to speak French that she had connected with a while ago, and they had gotten my dad out of custody a few days later, and he came home and pretty much told us the story of how they took him and how they had been watching us ever since the morning. They saw me and my siblings walking to the bus stop to school, and just hearing that and hearing that there were people who were watching us and that they were ready to take us at any time just made growing up even scarier, and it made my experience as an immigrant and undocumented even more real than before. And again, not being able to share this with any of my friends, knowing that they wouldn't understand, or having that fear that we would get discovered, it's an experience that it's so hard to articulate, and it's very difficult to. That's why I get so upset when you hear things like illegal. No human is illegal. You hear things like alien, and you hear things like these people are rapists and drug dealers, and absolutely not. That's not the case whatsoever. Like, a lot of immigrants are really amazing people that come to this country for opportunity, much like Trump's ancestors did, much like a lot of the people who came to this country just for opportunity. So when you hear these type of words, it frustrates me to my core, because I don't feel that my parents came to this country to harm anyone, and they came to this country to give me and my siblings opportunities that they couldn't have in their country of Cameroon. So I was able to get papers in 2013. We finally got our green cards. So with just all of that drama to say, and just the fear of being taken and not knowing if we were ever gonna live in America again, it was really intense, just trying to face that reality as a child, and the possibility of us having to leave our country that we were raised in, essentially a country that this is what we knew, this is how we grew up. English, it may not have been our first language, but it became our primary language. So imagine, being taken from everything that you know and brought to a foreign land because they tell you that this is where you belong. It's ludicrous. It truly is. So that is exactly why the repeal of Daca, or the attempted repeal of Daca, really shook me to my core, and this is why I decided that I wanted to speak on this panel and tell my testimony of how it felt growing up with that fear in my heart, and how no child should feel that way, and no child should be made to feel like they are unwanted and that they are illegal, because again, no human is illegal. As I was saying, I got my papers, my green card, in 2013, and I think for the first time in about 17 years, my family finally felt a sense of security and relief. And we were finally able to sleep peacefully at night, without one eye open and without the fear of one day being deported. Something really crazy actually happened to me today. About 2 hours ago, I had a family friend call me, and I actually grew up with this family friend, the only person whose house I was allowed to sleep over. And yeah, like, African parents are really intense. They don't let us sleep over anywhere, but they don't. She actually called me, and it had been a while since I spoke to her, because at a very young age, she got deported. And this just kind of spoke to the realities that she got deported back to Cameroon. So this is me trying to let you guys know that it's not just a Latinx issue. And me growing up, I saw this happen. She was taken from the only place she knew, and her mom were deported back to Cameroon. And it was horrible, because we were so close. She was pretty much family, Again, the only house I was allowed to sleep over, so it was like my best friend. She got deported, and the whole process of that happening made us realize that we were not safe in this country, and we were targets, So it was really intense having to experience that. So when she called me today right before this, I was like, wow, if this isn't a sign from God, this is just crazy. She called me and she wanted to see how I was doing, and it had been a while since we've spoken. We follow each other on Snapchat, so we're keep each other updated through that, but it just reminded me of my childhood and the experiences that I went through being undocumented, and making this moment even more important because I'm able to speak on the behalf of people who don't have the ability to speak for themselves anymore because of their circumstances. So I guess after getting my papers, and again, my family, we finally felt this sense of relief that we were able to finally relax and can travel with a travel document. So for the first time, my mom was able to see her entire family in Turin, Italy, and just that moment alone was extremely overwhelming, and it was very emotional. There were a lot of tears, and it was very beautiful because she was able to be reunited with her brothers and sisters that she hadn't seen for so long, and that moment, it just kind of made all of the trials and the finances, like my college tuition went to go, it went into paying for our papers and documentation. So it made all of that worth it, because at the end of the day, she was finally able to be reunited with her family, and my dad was finally able to be reunited with his brother. So, and I was finally able to be reunited with my army of cousins that I hadn't seen in so long. Just that moment alone made all the years of struggling and fear and just all those trials, it made it worth it. And it's my hope and my prayers that everyone is finally able to experience that same feeling. And I hope to one day be able to return to Cameroon and to be able to see my grandfather. I know someone, the last panelist mentioned speaking to her grandmother on the phone, and I don't know if anyone out here is foreign, but those phone calls, they cost money, and it's really not easy with the time difference either. So just, before you think negatively of people who came to this country in ways that you didn't, just put yourselves in their shoes and just think of the sacrifices that they went through to get here for the opportunities that are presented in America. So that's all I have to say, and thank you for listening.
All right. Raise this up. All right, thank you. All right, thank you all for coming here tonight. I want to especially heartfelt thank you for those of you who shared your stories tonight with us. It's very impactful, and I'm sure that everybody here got a lot out of that. Can you guys hear me all right? Okay. So, good evening. I am Craig Cook, professor of ethnic studies here at City College. I also teach black studies courses here at City College. And again, I want to thank you all for being here this evening to support our students, our community, and it's very important, that we are all here to share in this moment. So thank you all for that. And as President Beebe stated in his open letter to DACA students, I'm going to quote this: "You are here at Santa Barbara City College because you want to better contribute. You want to better yourselves and contribute to the other country, the only country and community that you know, this country and this community." So quickly, here is my presentation overview. I'm going to talk about this terminology, the power of words, as we started with today, this word of illegal versus undocumented. We're going to quickly go over immigration impact in the United States, go over some quick legislation that was passed regarding immigration, and then finally finish with DACA and DAPA. So, bless you. So, illegal versus undocumented. So again, when we're talking about immigrants, try to use undocumented when referring to those without documentation. Please consider these tonally sensitive points as you discuss immigration, regardless of your position. Because again, it implies criminality. While presence without proper documents is obviously a civil offense, it's not a criminal one. And it's akin to calling a criminal defendant guilty before a verdict is rendered. And finally, it scapegoats individual immigrants for problems that are largely systemic, and creates an environment of hate by exploiting racial fear. It increases the public's tolerance for daily violations of human rights. So, we all know the story of immigration is inseparable from this country's history, right? As Saturn said, she's in 2 of my classes this semester, and she's great. She touched on many of my points that I was going to touch on today. So obviously, she's taking my immigration history course right now. So obviously, she is paying attention in it. So all Americans, with the exception of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, are descended from immigrants. The story of those immigrants is also the story of our country's growth. And how America will adjust to these changing demographics remains to be told, but lessons we know can be learned from the past. Tens of millions of people, immigrants, have came to America and have tried to made this country what it is today. They've come to make new lives, not just for themselves, but new livelihoods in this new world. Their hard work not only is going to benefit themselves, their families, but it also benefits this country. So essentially, immigration has made the USA. It has played a key role in not only making America's development possible, but also shaping the basic nature of our society. Their urban destinations, their numbers, and a general antagonism towards foreigners, we know has led to many periods of xenophobia in our country, this fear of immigrants. So now, today in the 21st century, American society once again is in a debate over immigration and the role of immigrants in our society. To some, they have these tired excuses, they're unable to assimilate, they're not willing to assimilate, too committed to their transnational connections, and too far removed from U.S. core values. Of course, other critics believe that these newcomers take away jobs, from Americans, and put undue burdens on our educational, our healthcare, and our welfare systems. And of course, some wrongly also believe they pose a threat to the society's basic structure. But the immigrants, of course, have supporters like us, who point out that each new immigrant wave inspired fear, suspicion, and concern by Americans, and that Americans claimed wrongly that each group of newcomers would somehow not fit in or would remain devoted to their old and foreign ways. So too, advocates of immigration and most historians of immigration history argue that immigrants obviously do enrich the United States in large ways because they do provide valuable services to this nation. So in every era of immigration, from the colonial times to the present, people around the world have opted for this American experience. They arrived as foreigners, bearers of languages, cultures, and religions that at times seemed too far alien for Americans. But over time, we see as ideas about U.S. culture start to change, the immigrants and their descendants are obviously simultaneously building strong ethnic communities and participating in American civic life, contributing to this nation's success. So I got a couple charts as well. This right here shows you the foreign-born population in the United States from 1860 to 2000. And you could see that pretty much after 1965, there was legislation passed then, which we'll talk about. You could see that the percentage of total population and the total foreign-born population is pretty much, neck and neck going up that chart there. Of course, I'm sure many of you have taken a history course, have heard a professor say history repeats itself, or maybe just heard it from anybody else. And this right here is a cartoon, if you will, that shows you history repeating itself. What we're dealing with today, immigrants being scapegoated, there's always been a group that this country's unfortunately scapegoated. For example, in 1780, the man here says, papist immigrants are wrecking our economy with their fecundity. We must erect a wall of brass around the country for the exclusion of Catholics. So this was at a time when Catholicism was in high disdain, especially the large Catholic Irish immigrants who were pouring in. Follow that up, another generation later, 1850, Chinese immigrants refused to assimilate. And if we let too many in, they'll undermine our economy. Again, you could just replace another group's name here, and we see this continually happening throughout history. And then finally in 1920, you see, now I've got nothing against Jews, but the Jews are coming in huge numbers. The economy can't take it. And then, of course, today, we've got nothing against Mexicans, but they refuse to assimilate. They're ruining our economy. We should erect a wall. So history marches on, nativism marches in place. So this right here is some of the legislation. Again, there's countless others, but I'm just going to focus on some of these today. And of course, the United States began legislating immigration instantly after it's won its independence from Great Britain. And the laws since enacted have reflected the politics and migrant flows of the times. In more recent years, laws and presidential actions have been shaped by concerns about refugees, undocumented immigration, and of course, terrorism. So let's start off with 1790 with the Naturalization Act. Our first census was taken in 1790, so a lot of our early legislation is built off of this census. And what this did was exclude non-white people from eligibility to naturalize. Naturalization requirements included 2 years residency in the country and, quote, good moral character, whatever that means. And an applicant must be a free white person. So it's setting who is eligible or that can become a citizen in 1790. And we can see this is going to be in place for a while. 1798, there are two pieces of legislation passed. You have the Alien Friends and the Enemies Act. The Alien Friends Act, this authorized the president to imprison or deport any alien who was deemed dangerous to the United States. So this was the first act that is going to give the power to authorize deportation of immigrants in our country. Also in that 1798 year, you have the Enemies Act. And this authorized the imprisonment of any male 14 years or older of a hostile nation during times of war. So obviously we see this act being used to justify the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, right? 120,000 Japanese Americans lost everything and were interned in camps. You know, very, very ugly spot on our nation's history. And today, a modified version of this permits the president to detain, relocate, or deport enemy aliens during time of war. Follow that up, in 1882, you have the Chinese Exclusion Act. Again, this is the first piece of legislation that's telling you what group we don't want here, right? It's saying Chinese Exclusion Act. So, you know, the Chinese are going to be marked as undesirable and are not allowed to immigrate. And this banned Chinese laborers from immigrating. And it also authorized the deportation of unauthorized Chinese immigrants. And this was mainly on the West Coast because the Chinese were coming in through the West Coast. So there was a lot of xenophobia and discrimination that Chinese experienced here in California along the West Coast. Fast forward to 1917, you have the Immigration Act, also known as the Asiatic Barred Zone Act. And this banned immigration from most Asian countries except for the Philippines, which of course was a territory of the United States at this time, and Japan. And the reason why it didn't with Japan is because in 1907, Japan agreed to stop issuing numbers of laborers to go to the United States to work. 1924, you have the National Origins Quota Act. This is, you know, the big one. This one was in place until 1965. This restricted immigration, which at the time had an annual cap of 350,000 per year, a decent amount, right? To cut it down to 165,000, so almost, you know, cut it in half. Nationality quotas equal 2% of the foreign-born individuals of the nationality from the 1890 census. So they went back to the 1890 census to use those numbers to justify who is going to be allowed in. So essentially, the laws are going to favor immigrants from Northern and Western Europe compared to those from Southern and Eastern Europe. And of course, Asian immigration was still banned as a part of that 1917 Act. Fast forward, and also in 1942, you have the Bracero Agreement. And of course, many of you know this. This was a bilateral agreement between the United States and the Mexican government to permit Mexican nationals to serve as temporary agriculture workers during World War II. Obviously, the United States had a huge labor shortage, and you know, it's a time of war, and we were feeding our allies, so it was very important, you know, to have these laborers. It was supposed to only last during the war, and they were supposed to be afforded good treatment and all that, and unfortunately, you know, that didn't happen. But the program would go and continue until 1964. So it continued during the Korean conflict. And then you have the Magnuson Act, 1943. Obviously, this is during World War II, right? World War II ends in 1945. And what's interesting about this, it's also known as the Chinese Exclusion Repeal Act. So this now got rid of that 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, saying that Chinese are allowed to come in here. However, only 105 per year. So essentially, it's essentially still a ban, right? 105 a year is very small. And in contrast to other quotas, which were based on country of citizenship, the quota for Chinese was based on ancestry. So now Chinese residents were also finally eligible to naturalize for the first time in this country's history. This was during World War II. And again, who are the United States enemies during World War II? Japan, Italy, and Germany. So Japan being an historical enemy of China, we now use China to be our ally to take on Japan. 1952, you have the Immigration and Nationality Act, also known as the Walter McCarran Act. This is important because this finally formally removed race as an exclusion for immigration and naturalization, and granted Asian countries now a minimum quota of 100 visas per year. Under this law, though, political activities, ideology, and mental health, among other categories, served as basis for exclusion. And then you have, in 1986, you have IRCA, the Immigration Reform and Control Act. This is going to replace, oh wait, I skipped it. I skipped 1965, the most important one. That is, I don't have it on there. It's the most important one. It's the full title is the Immigration and Nationality Act, also known as the Hart-Celler Act. This one's important because it got rid of those quotas, the percentages. And this replaced the national origins quota with a 7-category preference system. And what it emphasized was family unification. So your parents, your grandparents, your brother, your sister. And also skilled immigrants were part of the exceptions. There was no visa cap placed on the number of immediate family members of US citizens admitted each year. So over the next 5 decades, the policies this policy in 1965 is obviously going to change the makeup of this country, as we'll see in the next 2 slides. Because now immigration is coming from untraditional sources of immigrant sending countries, right? Not from Europe. Now it's coming from Latin America, from Asia, and from Africa. And if you know anything about this act, is that post-1965, immigrants from Asia and Latin America have been the largest numbers coming to this country, with immigrants, Mexican immigrants and Filipino and Filipina immigrants being the 2 largest post-1965. Again, now we'll get back to IRCA. This guided a pathway to permanent residency to undocumented workers who lived in the United States since 1982 or worked in certain agricultural jobs. So as a result of this, 2.7 million undocumented immigrants were granted this status. It also created the H-2A visa for temporary seasonal workers. It imposed sanctions on employers who willfully hire undocumented workers, and also increased border enforcement. So you can see here with this chart, this shows you 1840 to 1889, 1890, 1919, and post-1965. So you can see the first bar shows you that 82% of immigrants coming in were from Northern and Western Europe. The second, you could see that it's changed to now Southern and Eastern Europe being 62%. And obviously, like I said, today it is now 51% from Latin America and 25% from Asia. And this is pretty recent. And it's showing you by state. It's interesting. The foreign-born populations by state. And of course, California, 25% of our residents in this state are foreign-born. And then obviously New York, Texas, and others are behind that. So now let's get into DACA, which of course stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This was passed in 2012, an executive action by President Obama. And what it did was give young adults who are 15 to 30 brought to the United States as undocumented children of undocumented parents. It allowed them to apply for temporary relief from deportation and a 2-year work permit. And almost 800,000 applicants have been approved for DACA. DAPA, or Deferred Action for Parents of Americans in Lawful Permanent Residence, also by Obama in 2014, this allowed unauthorized immigrant parents who have lived in the country for at least 5 years and who have children who are U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents to apply for deportation relief, but also, more importantly, to give them a 3-year work permit. So obviously we know many now are feeling much skepticism, a feeling of whiplash with what's been going on in the last few weeks, right? First, the president says he'll end DACA, and a week later he says he wants to make a deal so that the Dreamers can stay in this country. And then we have, in the last couple of days, GOP backlash, and now he wants conditions, that are placed on the deal. So some Dreamers are equating this to essentially, like a psychological torment, right? Like one day, we're going to be kicked out. Next day he might, so it's like there's this turmoil, this limbo. And interesting statistics, 95% of all DACA recipients are working or in school. 48% got a job with better working conditions. 90% got a driver's license or state ID. 12% were even able to buy a first home. So immigrant youth, immigrant families, and our allies in all sectors of American life are here to say, regardless of the president's mass deportation fantasies and objectives, Americans will not let this dictate the fate of the immigrants who have obviously placed so much trust in our country. So this is the time where you never hear a professor say this. I'm going to allow you to take out your phones and take a picture of this. So those of you who have, you never hear that from any of your instructors, right? Take a picture. Take out your phone. So if any of you have friends, family members, anybody, these are all kinds of great resources for you to send to them that can be a great beneficial assistance to them and their family members. And I have another one on the next slide, so everybody get your pictures in. Good, good. Okay. And I think they had this out there, right? Did I see this out there? But in case you didn't get one of the flyers out there, you could see DACA forums. There's one going to be in Santa Barbara on the 23rd at Casa de la Raza from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And there's others in other local communities around us as well. So here's another great opportunity for those of you who are interested. And I'll leave it with this right here. It says, they say they're building a wall because too many of us enter illegally and won't learn their language or assimilate into their culture. So thank you very much.
Hello. Oh, hi. My name is Vanessa Frank, and I'm an immigration attorney. My office is in Ventura. And I was brought today to share a little bit about the current laws, but I think Professor Cook kind of nailed that one. And I also could share stories about undocumented families, which we already heard some really wonderful stories. I was reflecting on the power of having folks not be seen, and I thought it was sort of, being on a college campus again, I was thinking sort of what is the symbology of that and what does it mean? And I thought it was really a good representation of the fact that so often we don't see immigrants, and especially undocumented people. We don't see them, and we don't see that they are undocumented. And so I really appreciate both the 3 students who spoke kind of hidden, and then the student who spoke, and we could see her, and to see that, the power, and hopefully we can all have a chance to reflect on the power of hearing their stories and then also seeing the story, and how that really affects how one understands this issue. I have some time. In that case, since we've talked about the law a little bit, I'm happy to answer questions about what's going on currently with the law and everything. And I think that there is a great, I'm not sure how many people here, thank you. How many people here are familiar with the issue of immigration or are immigrants or kind of understand the law, but I'm going to, I won't assume how many people here are immigrants or not immigrants. I'm willing to take questions Not personal questions like, oh, I filed an application 2 weeks ago, what's going to happen? Like that, I'm not doing that. I'm here to take sort of more sort of general questions like, well, what common one is, well, why don't these people just get in line? Like, why do they have to be here illegally? Why do they have to be here undocumented or whatever they want to call themselves? Why don't they just like do it the right way? And so that's a really common question and I think a really good question. I shouldn't have acted that way, but I just see it so often. And I think the answer, we got a great story from Saturn that is not uncommon, that it would take many years. And it goes back to what Professor Cook was showing very quickly, that 1965 Act, which puts limits on the number of visas that are issued every year. So, and as he also briefly mentioned, if you caught it, Mexicans, Filipinos, also Chinese and Indians, those 4 countries, sometimes the Dominican Republic, have so many people that apply that the backlogs can be really long. For example, a US citizen is allowed to apply for a green card for their sibling, their brother or sister. If you happen to be a Filipino brother or sister of a US citizen, the wait is backlogged to, I think, 1990 right now. So that means that people that filed the application in 1990 are still in Manila, like chilling for 27 years, waiting for that green card. So that might be one reason that people don't just get in line. The other reason they don't just get in line is that sometimes there's no line to get into. And that's where we get with these DACA folks. And I'm not sure if it was clear from what Professor Cook was saying, but that DAPA program, the Deferred Action for Parents, never came online because immediately Texas and 25 other states filed an injunction, and the court in Texas granted it and the Supreme Court wouldn't reopen it. And all to say, and then Jeff Sessions came in and then they just canceled it. So it never happened. So for those folks who came in to the United States, either lawfully, and sometimes people do come in lawfully on some sort of visa and it expires and then they stay, or they came in unlawfully, but now they've been here for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years. The last time anybody could get their papers was 1986, the IRCA. So that's 31 years ago. And the people that got their papers in 1986 had to have been here in 1982. So if you do that math, it's 35 years since the last wave of people could come in, offer their service to this country as employees, as workers, as families, as neighborhood community members. It's been 35 years since those people could get in line and sign up for something. So I think that is the most common misconception that I get, is that immigrants are somehow, well, certainly at fault, right? They're broke, or they're uninformed, or they're just too lazy, and it's none of the above. It is none of that. It is people working very hard and very willing to get into a line, as we saw with 800,000 young people. As soon as they gave them a line to get into for DACA, they were on the stick. And I saw a client today who got his DACA. He was one of the first in November of let me do this. I saw he's in to do his renewal. November of 2012, he got his first DACA, and I looked down, and if I can get the math right, you guys can figure it out. He was born in, is it right, 1998? I was looking at his birth certificate. He's born in 98, or not his birth certificate, his date of birth is 1998, and he got his DACA in 2012, and I thought, wait a second, so you just turned 15, and he's like, yup. I turned 15, and we filed like right away, and he was one of the very first, because DACA came, you were allowed to apply in August of 2012, and his was November. He got approved in November, which means he filed, right? So he was on the stick. He's not somebody who, he found the $465, he filed the application, he got in line, he gave his information, and the vast majority of immigrants do that. There was another law that's very, very helpful for those of us interested in changing the laws, the 245I law in 1998 and then extended in 2001, which said that people who had family members who applied for them previous to a date could then get papers in the United States. And man, oh man, when they opened that up, like people filed, and they would love to file. So I think it's on us, those of us who are citizens in the room, to open up a pathway for people to raise their hand, file their paperwork. They will pay. There are funders out there for the DACA people. You'll know about Mission Asset Fund by now. My office has free money. There are people who will sponsor people to apply for things. But we just need to create the path for folks to do that. So with that, are there any questions that I can answer? Yeah. Oh, sure. Okay. Yes, thank you, Maricela. She's my plant in the audience. So right now we're doing the last Daca renewals, as far as we know, right? So the president ended Daca, and what people are not, what's unclear about it is it's supposed to end on March 5th, but what it really means is, as Professor Cook had said, right, Daca is good for 2 years, although some people got a 3-year. DACA is good for a 2-year permit, and you're allowed to apply to renew that permit every 2 years, right? And you're allowed to apply 5 months before it expires. So if your permit expires in May, you can apply in January, right? Or December, right? So Trump said he wanted to end DACA, and he did it in a humane way, I suppose. So as opposed to the Muslim ban, where like people were actually like on an airplane, and it was like, boom, you can't come into the country, and they're like, oh, my plane lands in 20 minutes, like, hello. So they learned from that, and the scuttlebutt is maybe John Kelly said something to him, but however it was, instead of just sort of ending it cold turkey, what he said was, what we're gonna do is essentially starting today, everybody who's able to apply for their renewal, so those are the people that can renew 5 months previous to that expiration, we're gonna let those people wrap up their renewals, and then nobody else. So I think that's the logic behind the deadline of if you apply before October 5th, which is 5 months before March 5th, 2018, you can apply to renew one last time if your work permit expires before March 5th of 2018. And so he's giving those people, just those last people, sort of presumably when he makes the announcement on September 5th, there's some people that were just like kind of getting their papers in order and gonna go hit the lawyer's office that day, and he's saying it's canceled, and they're like, but, so he's giving them the chance to just wrap that up. So he's nice, right? Except, okay, come on. He's your president. Oh yeah, so there's that. And then the other thing was, it's not so nice because, just to really stick it to people, if you had already had your DACA expire, for whatever reason you let it lapse, even if your DACA expired on September 4th, the day before that announcement, if it had expired by the time he dropped that announcement down, you don't get to renew anymore. Which, like a year ago, I filed a bunch of those this year, people who missed it, came in a little late and oops. And so obviously they had to pay the price of being out of DACA status for a couple weeks while their new card came, but no, that's out. The only people that can renew right now are people whose DACA expires between September 5, 2017 and March 5, 2018, that 6-month window. Those are the only people. And that's pretty much what all the immigration lawyers, at least in Ventura County, that's pretty much what we're doing this month. And the rest of my clients hate me. Other questions? Oh yeah, that's another fun point. Yeah, no more new, only renewals. So a kid that just turned 15 was super excited, and they turned 15 on September 5th, and they were gonna go in the next, they're done. Yeah, that's it, nobody new. So if you do kind of the math, which is fun mental math games that immigration lawyers play in the middle of the night, we have this funny generation of people, and I did the math the other night, that the youngest person with DACA right now will be 15, because they actually, if they filed their initial application in September of 2017. So we've got 15-year-olds, and then the oldest person is 36, if they apply, because they had to be 30 when it came out. So we've got this funny generation of 15 to 36-year-olds, and that little cohort will be a group that moves through the system in some way. Yeah. If you lost your work permit, yeah, they thought of that too, because that also occurred to me in the middle of the night. I was like, oh, no, they're savvy. If you lose your work permit, you can send the $495, it went up, $495, and they'll send you your new work permit, and it will expire on that same date that your old one expired on. So you can't game it. Nice try. Yeah, I thought of that one too. But yeah, but in all seriousness, if you do lose the card, yes, please file now to get, if you legitimately lost the card, you should get your card and spend the money and get it. There was another question. You can never apply for a green card from inside the United States. There is no arreglar por el tiempo. There's no way to get your papers. You've been here for 10 years. Here's your green card. That's the whole point. There's no. And this week, I've been talking to a lot of folks that have not seen a lawyer. This is the first time they did their DACA on their own or whatever. Some lady down the street did it, whatever. So they're seeing me for the first time, or seeing a lawyer for the first time, happens to be me. And the only thing I do a full assessment on them of like, could you get status this way, that way, this, and I'm telling them, sometimes they already knew it, but I'm just confirming for them, this was your shot, huh? And they're like, pretty much, this is it. This is it. DACA was the only thing. I'm 19, I'm 25. I have a client who's going to graduate this year, and she was like, I didn't work. I never worked on my work permit because I went to school, because then I was going to get my degree and then work. And so I'm lining up job offers because I'm in my senior year of college. And I said, well, we'll renew you, and it won't expire till like January of 2020. And she was like, yup. And I said, yup. Oh yeah, right. Sorry. I'll repeat questions. There was somebody in the back. Yeah. Can an employer sponsor somebody? If you have worked unlawfully in the United States, then you cannot, you're no longer eligible for an employment-based visa. If you've lived here unlawfully out of status, either you came in without status or you had it and it expired. If you've lived here without status, then an employer, but not worked, which is rare, frankly, but okay, let's say, then an employer could apply for you, but you would need a waiver for having been here without status, and that otherwise you would not be able to get a visa for 10 years. You need to go home to your home country, or be out of the United States. You don't have to go to your home country, but you have to be out of the United States for 10 years. And then you can get that work visa. Sure, they'll hold the job. Next question. Can kids who are citizens get papers for their parents when the kids turn 21? That's a common question. No. So U.S. citizens at 21 can apply for their family members. They can apply for their parents, their spouse, their children, and their siblings. But if any of those people have been in the country unlawfully, then they have a problem getting their green card because they've broken an immigration law. So in some cases, parents of citizens can get their papers if those parents came in lawfully. But if the parents came in without a visa, they crossed, they just walked across the border, they snuck across, whatever, then they are not allowed to get their papers here. They have to go out. When they go out, it's a 10-year bar. So for the most part, no. And we see a lot of folks like that are so excited. They've been here for 25 years without papers, and, they're super excited. Their child's going to turn 21 next week, and let's do this. Let's get this show on the road. And then I have to tell them, no, there's no show on the road. You can get your papers easily. You just need to leave the country for 10 years. And when your kid's 31, we'll do it. And I'll be here, and it'll be great. And usually at that point, people start feeling really disappointed. Wait, let me get somebody else's question. Okay, no, there isn't one. Okay, go ahead. Right. If you came in without papers, there's pretty much no way to become a citizen. No, if you get married, then you still have the waiver problem. I mean, yeah. Again, it depends on what my audience is. So for my audience of immigrants, my immigrant audience, my answer is, you got to talk to a lawyer and see if you qualify for a waiver. If my audience is allies, my answer is no. The vast majority of people, if they've been here without papers, if they came on a visa but it expired, or they didn't come on a visa, or they were brought here, or they were told to come, they will not have a way. There's no line for them to get into. They cannot get their papers ever. Okay? Like, ever. And your friends that were speaking, they will never, once DACA is not a lawful status, they will never get their papers. So if you think about what that means to live here, and I've had numerous clients. One woman says she came when she was a year old. I had a client really who came at 41 days. You know Mexican culture, like when the baby's born, you just like chill for 40 days. The kid came on the 41st day. And I looked at the mom and she was like, yup. And I was like, you know, like she did her 40 days and brought that baby. That kid knows nothing about Mexico. No papers for you, okay, unless we change the laws. Your mom maybe can't, I mean, this, I don't want to get into So your mom probably had a 245I, maybe somebody filed an application for her previously, or she came in on a visa. Okay. It's very, very rare. So your mother either came in on a tourist visa, which is very, very rare, increasingly rare, or somebody filed a green card application for her before 2001. Could be that. 2001 is 17 years ago now. Okay. Well, it's 17 years ago. So there are like, yes, and I mean, I refer to those people as my clients, but it's not that there aren't any of them. That's why I'm saying it depends on my audience. So with immigrants, come talk to me. Let's see what we can work out. But with, yeah, for an immigrant, yeah, come talk to me. Don't give up hope. But for allies, like, are you kidding me? We're hoping that these people somehow had some aunt file an application for them in 1999 so that, and then hopefully they were here in December of 2000 so that they'll qualify for the 245I and then they get to pay an extra fee. And then their kid turns 21 and they'll finally get to get their papers. That's their path. That's increasingly rare because the last time you were able to do that was in 2001. So we're getting, and when I first started doing immigration law, we were like, oh, you know, maybe they'll extend 245I. You know, like in 2004, we're like, maybe they'll extend 245I. They'll extend it. Well, come on, man. Like somewhere around 2008, I was like, man, that's not going to happen. Like people are just going to get left. Okay, and 245I, for the nerdy law and pre-law people among you, 245I said that if somebody, an employer or a family member filed an application for you or your spouse, or you were a minor child of somebody who got an application filed before April of 2001, I'm sorry, yeah, April of 2001, April 30, 2001, then you are grandfathered and you're able to get your green card in the United States. You don't have to leave. You don't have to worry about the 10-year bar. You pay a fee, a $1,000 fee on top of everything else, a $1,000 fee. And people are like, who do I write the check to, right? And the way the law is written is like nobody gets in unless they had this application filed, and it's really it's section 245I of the code of INA. And if you look, it's the very last word of the sentence, filed before April 30th, 2001. If we changed that to April 30th, 2018, we wouldn't have to change the law. We don't have to do a big reform effort. We could just change it and like, whoo-bam, whoosh. You know, I conservatively estimate like 5 million of the 11 million undocumented off the books, right? Because somebody filed for them, their sister, their brother, an employer in 2003 or in 2008, or they had a kid that just turned 21 in 2012, but they didn't file for them because what's the point? And we could just like, ni modo, like not like this huge reform and Dick Durbin and Lindsey Graham and all the drama. Just change that one thing. That's the 245I. That's something that we could do, and it would just wipe a bunch of people off the books. So there are lots of ways. There are reforms big and small. I want to say, me personally, as an advocate and immigration attorney, I stand with the dreamers who say that their parents were the first dreamers, and that a lot of the dreamers have come out in this movement saying that they don't want a DREAM Act, you know, just for me, and, you know, screw everybody over 35. You know, we really need a comprehensive reform. And I know a lot of parents were into the second generation where truly their parents were the first dreamers. The young woman that was saying that her dad came when he was 25. Well, that's a dreamer, right? Like now he's old, right? He's like 45. I think it's rather in the prime of life, personally. But I'm sure to some of you, 45 seems ancient. But, you know, he's a dreamer, right? He's 25. He came over. He was a young man with small children fighting for his family. Now he's old and decrepit. And he's got his second generation, right? The young woman who spoke is also. So when we talk about dreamers and we think of these like cute little 17-year-olds, they are adorable. But there are also people who are 40 and 45 who are also equally adorable, 50 years old, who came over at a young age. And my great-grandparents came over at a young age. But they came over at a different point in history when the rules were different and they didn't have to go through the hurdles. And it wasn't a 245I and labor certification and the you know, they just got sprayed with God knows what kind of DDT for lice and pasa adelante, right? So that was the system. So when people say, well, my family did it legally, my family did do it legally because the law was roll on up, let us take a picture, sign here, ma'am, and go on in. Sure. Right. And I'm sure my family was really traumatized by that experience, but that's nothing in comparison to what people go through today. Yeah. Oh, right on.
So in regards to SB 54 that was just passed, I guess a lot of the undocumented immigrants here, how are they protected with you know, saying that there isn't really much that they can do, you know, with the bill that was just passed? What is the protection that they have under the law?
Under SB 54?
Yes.
Well, SB 54, it's a great question. I'm going to defer to Maricela because she's the super expert on this. She's following me. But I will say quickly that what we really do, the lawyer is going to explain that what we really need to understand is that immigration law is federal. And in the United States, right, we have 50 states and colonies and territories, but we have the states and then we have the federal government. Immigration is federal law. So there's one immigration law across the country, although, anyway. There's one immigration law for the whole country, but individual states can control certain laws of the state. For example, like driver's licenses, right? So California used to issue driver licenses, it didn't, and then like tears and blood and sweat, now we do driver's licenses again. California, again, you guys might be familiar with AB 540, which is in-state tuition. California DREAM Act, which provides scholarship money to undocumented students once all lawful students have tapped that fund. If there's money left over, it can go to undocumented folks. So those are California rules. California cannot pass a law like, let's just legalize everybody. We can't do that in California, although if we became our own country, we could. I'm still holding that out there. But we can, you know, so as long as we're part of the United States, or better yet, as long as Texas is part of the United States, we can't move this, right? So if we let go of the Southeastern Conference and Texas, we're making a lot of progress. So SB 54 is a state law, and it talks about state law enforcement and state interaction with federal law enforcement, immigration law enforcement. And I'm going to let Maricela, that's a great segue. I'm going to have Maricela come up and share more about that. I'll stick around afterwards if you have other questions. But thank you guys so much. This is such an important topic. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. My name is Maricela Morales, and I'm Executive Director of CAUSE, and we do community organizing. And one of the things that we work around is immigrant rights. I wanted to add a couple of laws to that wonderful list that was a highlight of laws. In 1929, we had what was called the Mexican Repatriation Act. So that was a law that, quote unquote, repatriated Mexicans. 60% of those that were, quote unquote, repatriated, as many as 2 million people were repatriated, as in deported. 60% of them were US-born citizens. So that was in 1929. It went from 1929 to 1936. In 1954, we had U.S. Operation Wetback. And again, that was the official name. That wasn't a colloquial name that, you know, people in the South started calling it. No, that was the official legal title, U.S. Operation Wetback. And that deported several million people of Mexican descent, including, even at that point, some US-born citizens. Not as many as 60%, but some still got caught up in the net. And about 500,000 left on their own. Just as we're seeing today, some families have already left because they've said, you know, I don't know when they're gonna come for me. You know, so might as well just leave now. So I highlight those two laws that were within the last century, less than a century, to say that when the threat of Trump, that we are going to deport 12 million people, and many people think, oh, that's a joke. How are you ever going to deport 12 million people? Well, if they deported 2 million in 1929, you can deport 12 million in 2017. So the fear that we live in, and I say we because, as the professor said, 25% of Californians are immigrants, which means that whether you yourself are the immigrant or the undocumented, you're likely to know somebody, because most of them are in what's called mixed family status. So it doesn't mean that everybody in the family is undocumented. The son, the brother, the mom, the dad, the grandmother, the tia, the tío, right? Someone in the family. So with 25% of the population immigrant in California, you're talking at least 50% probably of the state knows somebody in their family who's undocumented. In Santa Barbara County, there are 40,000 undocumented people. So this is not 40,000 immigrants, but 40,000 undocumented immigrants. That's larger than 5 out of the 8 cities in all of Santa Barbara County. That's like getting rid of the entire city of Buellton, the entire city of Solvang, the entire city of Carpinteria, the entire city of Guadalupe, the entire city of, I think those are all of them. All of those, or each of them, right, 40,000. So if we think that because we may not consciously know anybody who's undocumented, that we can live under this threat and not be touched in any way, then we are living in a dream world. Because if that many people were ousted from our community, we would all be touched in some way. And so we have to organize. We started with the word. And all organizing is really speaking the word, finding your own voice, encouraging others to find their own voice. And the beauty of what we still have as a democracy, what little of it there is that we do have vehicles to speak the word. You can send an email, you can send a letter, you can write a letter to the editor, you can call up your state legislature, you can call up Congressman Salud Carvajal. You can use your voice. And that's what we need right now. We need every single person, really, to find something, some way to express your voice on this issue at least once a month. Maybe that's a lot to ask for. But think about 40,000 people in your community, some of whom might be your friends, might be your classmates, might be the person that, you know, cleans this this college campus, right? That might be your friend's nanny, because we will allow undocumented people to raise our children, but we won't allow them to be here legally. So we need to use our voice. At this time, since we are talking about DACA, okay, you need to contact Salud Carvajal, because decisions are going to be made. Now, maybe a deal won't be struck. I mean, really, we're dealing with crazies. So maybe a deal may not be struck. But there's this window of opportunity where maybe a deal might be struck. But unfortunately, what we'll be grappling with is at what cost? Because right now, the kind of deal they want to make is to further militarize the border. Since the 1990s under Clinton, the border has been militarized with all kinds of equipment, with 50% more border patrol, and it's resulted in an escalation of deaths along the border because it's more difficult to cross. So what's on the table, one of the things that's on the table is, sure, we'll get these dreamers back, in line, keep their dream alive, but, we're gonna further militarize the border. Or, we're gonna go ahead and get those 15,000 additional ICE and Border Patrol agents, 15,000 more, in order to deport all the other ones, right? So we'll protect the dreamers, that million, right? But those other 11 million, now we're gonna have 15,000 more Border Patrol and ICE agents so we can deport all of them. So that's what's at play right now. And maybe we can pass a deal that doesn't sacrifice 11 million for 1 million, because as Vanessa said, those 1 million, they're caught in the worst of binds. Yes, of course I want to protect myself, but at the cost of sacrificing my mom? I mean, what kind of perverse, agreement are we putting before people? So this is the time to focus, with regards to DACA, to focus on our congressperson, Salud Carvajal, and watch what he's doing, pay attention, or simply, without even knowing what's on the table, write your letter, write your email, sign up. If you go onto the causenow.org website, you can sign up to be on our email list, and you'll get alerts as to, contact, him about this right now. So bottom line, we have to use our voice. We weren't here during the Repatriation Act. We weren't here during the Chinese Exclusion Act or the Japanese internment. And it's really easy for us to say right now, well, that was crazy. That was stupid. That was hateful. Had I been there, during that time, that wouldn't have happened. Well, this is our time. This is our time. And so if we don't say anything, if we don't use our voice, then we're as liable as Trump. I mean, I'll say it straight out. If we do not stand up for one another, then we are just as liable as the person who signs it into law. So in answer to SB 54, as Vanessa said, we can't legislate immigration law at a state level. So SB 54 is our attempt to keep federal agents as far away as possible. That's what we can do as a state. So what it says in essence is federal ICE agents can't go onto school campuses. They can't go into courthouses. They can't go into hospitals. So they've identified these sensitive areas where, by definition, it's important that people feel safe or safer. So it's identified these, sort of safe zones that ICE can't go into to do their raids. And it's also put a little bit greater of a distance between federal ICE and local law enforcement, whether that's your local PD or really most likely sheriffs that incarcerate people. And so it created some space, some distance between those two, based on the premise that We don't agree with the federal action right now that's out to deport 12 million people. What we can do is try to keep them at bay as much as we can. And so that's what SB 54 does. It doesn't provide a pathway to citizenship or even to green status. It's basically trying to keep federal ICE away so that those 12 million people, 2 million in California, I believe, feel a little bit more like they're not constantly having to, look over their shoulder if they're in class, right? That ICE is going to show up. At least they're safe there. So that's what SB 50 in a nutshell does. So I'll leave it at that. The focus is at the federal level right now, and here at the local level, it will be to continue to enforce these laws and make sure, one thing is to pass them, get these laws adopted, and then another thing is to be on top of local agencies to ensure that they're actually being applied. So that's something that will be happening as well. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for the time that we spent together and the stories that you heard in different forms. Everybody had something important to add to this conversation, to this overall story. So thank you for coming out and listening. We are honored to be able to hold these type of spaces for our community, and we will continue to do that. And know that you do have a voice, and what you say and what you do with the information that you receive, with the stories you heard, that matters out there. So do something with that. Thank you very much. Have a good night.